Welcome to summer and the final DNC session, focusing on achievements and strategies to sustain improvements. Next slide. The Pediatric Pandemic Network is supported in part by the HRSA of the US DHHS as part of several cooperative agreements. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention specifically that we're going to include some funtivities and a brief thank you video today. So you'll see a slide about having your phones ready. So if you can get those out, that'll be great. In addition, today you all and all of your team members should have received a final collaborative evaluation, and it's very important that everyone on your team complete that so we can get as much data as possible about how successful this collaborative was and how important pediatrics, kids, and preparedness is. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda for today. Next slide. After this session, you will be able to achieve these objectives. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, if you don't mind just knowing where your phones are. Kevin McCulley, I'd like to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Laura, and hello, everyone. Happy to be back to celebrate the successes and certainly look for the path forward. You know, as we think about the foundations that have been offered through participation in the Disaster Networking Collaborative, engagement, influence, internal and external coordination, planning, growing the pediatric voice. Each of these really serve as a bedrock or the foundation for the development of both planned and ad hoc contingency strategies or missions during disasters, catastrophes, or crises. The things that were covered by this group really help provide the structure to activate for a response when that bad day comes. Thinking about things like the use of the incident command system through this lens really gets back to the core of a lot of my previous work and many of your work every day. And that's the management of space, supplies, staff, and systems, but also leveraging the skills and the connections that have been developed to sustain situational awareness, have very excellent information sharing, and appropriate management of resources. As we look forward, and you can go to the next slide, to really dig in through the Disaster Response Collaborative on some specific elements of disaster planning, evacuation, reunification, triage, decontamination, and surge management. This is a really natural next step from the foundations that were built through participation in the DNC. And what's important to note is although the Disaster Response Collaborative will dig into some priority areas, it really has impacts across many areas of a response, because what we have seen in prior responses is that it's often not a linear progression when bad things happen. There may be multiple missions that need to be implemented either in rapid succession or simultaneously. And so in the end, all of this work really builds us toward developing a well-functioning response system ready to implement planned missions, but also to think about the capacities to develop ad hoc or de novo missions that may not have been considered in planning scenarios. And as the old adage goes, plans might be important, but the process of planning is everything. And as we look at the context of this work against the continuum of disaster planning, certainly my thoughts and my experiences often lead to the consideration for the darkest of dark sky days, which is the implementation of things such as crisis standards of care plans. And so much of our work in disaster readiness is to forestall or to eliminate the need to move into a crisis scenario where care may not be able to be provided for everyone in the way that it should be. But what we do know, certainly by the foundational work of the IOM and many others, is that the work that we do every day to increase preparedness and readiness means that we can better use contingency strategies to delay, forestall, or at least limit the amount of time that we collectively as an institution, a system, a state, or a nation would be even put in that position of having to make the hardest healthcare decisions of determining who might get care on those bad days. So I'm very gracious, very thankful for the team for putting this all together. Very happy you all have stayed with us on this journey, and very much look forward to seeing you in the Disaster Response Collaborative and other places. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Kevin. So we have a
Just wanted to say thanks to everyone that participated in the Disaster Networking Collaborative. It's been a great time hearing from you all and seeing the progress that you've made throughout the course of the collaborative. And I've really enjoyed some of the conversations I've had in the breakout sessions especially. Hopefully we can continue this great work in the Disaster Response Collaborative coming up next. And I look forward to your guys' continued engagement, working to improve pediatric disaster preparedness for everyone. Thanks so much.
It was a pleasure to work with you during the DNC. Your efforts to advocate for children and position children's hospitals to be leaders in pediatric preparedness were commendable. Thank you.
Throughout the DNC, you have assessed your gaps and worked on building the infrastructure in your hospital to be prepared for disaster or pandemic. Thank you for taking the necessary steps to improve now so that your leadership, your employees, and your community can be prepared when these events occur.
I just wanted to say that we appreciate your efforts to ensure your children's hospital will be ready for disasters, pandemics, and other emergencies.
Hey everyone, congratulations on a tremendous accomplishment. Thank you for all your work with the Disaster Networking Collaborative. Because of you, we are able to move towards standardization of disaster response teams and really elevate the voice of children and children's hospitals in the disaster space. Thank you so much for participating with us.
The relationships The partnerships and the coalitions that we build together are so critically important to empowering each of our institutions to become resilient. Your work in establishing the optimal structures and frameworks will ultimately benefit the patients and the families that we serve. So for that, you have our gratitude.
On behalf of the network leadership, I applaud and congratulate each of the teams for successfully completing the Disaster Networking Collaborative. As we continually strive to improve the readiness, research, resiliency, and response capability of children's healthcare to global threats, disasters, and everyday emergencies, we hope that your experience in the Disaster Networking Collaborative was valuable, but more importantly, that it's just the start of our journey with you. And we hope to see you again, whether it's in the Disaster Response Collaborative, another PPN project, or come see us in person at one of the many conferences in which many of the PPN members are in attendance. Thank you again.
So again, thank you all for joining us for the DNC and today for our final session. And as we move forward and we hear from our speakers, I want you to keep in mind your projects and all that you've put into this collaborative. We thank you again. So our presenters today, you've got me, Julie Shelton. I'm with the Quality Improvement Service Corps and your collaboratives. I'm an advanced quality improvement specialist. And then we'll also hear from Christy and Lindsay in a little bit about their projects in the DNC. Before we get started, Laura had mentioned that we're going to do some fun activities. So if you want to grab your phone and you can scan the QR code, or you can just type in slido.com and then it's going to ask you for a participant's ID, I believe. And you can put in this number, 3132-47447. And we're asking you in 1 or 2 words to tell us what you've gained from DNC. We'll watch a word cloud pop up. These are fantastic. Give it another minute. This is great. This is all the things that we were hoping for when we started planning for this. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you all. This is exciting. All right. So we've done the 9 sessions of the Disaster Networking Collaborative. You have done your environmental scan, done your project. What we wanted to talk about today is we want to hear from a few hospitals that have done their projects, and we want to hear some of the great work. But before we jumped into that, I wanted to talk to you about sustaining your improvements. So if you think about when you plant a seed, you can't just leave it in the ground. You can't plant it and then hope it grows on its own. You've got to water it. You've got to tend to it. You've got to make sure the animals don't step on it. So you have to make sure those weeds don't grow around it and smother the plant. I think that's the one that is the biggest in my garden are these weeds, right? And if you kind of look at the parallel to that in our work, it's the priorities. Those other priorities start to take over. And so many times in quality improvement, we make these changes and we see the improvement in our data, but that doesn't mean that the change is going to stick just naturally. So we have to monitor the change and we have to keep on going. So I'm thinking about adding more meetings to someone's schedule. If they've gotten a promotion or if they've gotten new responsibilities, it's really hard to keep that up, to prevent the frustration and the burnout if that happens. We've got to look at other priorities and making sure that that doesn't take over people's time or even leadership support, the other priorities that lean in and need their support. If we think about it, a change is just a change until it's adopted as a habit, right? So we really need to figure out how do we get this to stick. Hopefully y'all have listened to the latest podcast, the PPN podcast. But Dr. Phyllis Hendry from our own DNC hospital in Golisano Children's Hospital in Florida, she talks about having this great relationship with local agencies and that she's improved their processes for evacuation and it's going great. But then she also talks about we're not done yet. We can't stop there. We have to keep going. We have to keep improving, and we have to keep doing what we do. And so there's this importance of sustaining the improvement work, not only for your projects when they're done, but also just to enhance your facility. We've got to keep that system infrastructure and the role in the community going and moving forward. So how do we do that? So a couple of things that just to throw out there, just to think about, continue working on your DNC plan. So again, you've done your environmental scan. Maybe you got your project from there. You decided there is a gap and we can start working on this. Maybe you already had a plan in place, but you started working in September and October on your plan, and maybe you completed the plan, maybe you didn't. Either way, even after today, after this 10th last session, keep going, keep improving on your project plan that you've had in DNC, even as we move into DRC. Disaster Response Collaborative. You gotta remember the acronyms. Okay. Think about who is going to own your work now. Okay. So just because the project is done, now we have to think about keeping it going. So who is going to monitor that data? Who is going to make sure that the people in the new roles and responsibilities continue with those responsibilities and stay on top of everything? Who's going to continue to make sure that the leadership support is there and strong? And who is going to make sure that we continue our relationships with our local HCCs, our regional partners. And so having someone that will own that, and I call it own it, because it could be a team, it could be multiple people, but someone to make sure that that work continues on. Plan for staff turnover, though. So that's, again, it doesn't have to be just one person who owns it. Maybe it's a couple people, because, as much as we would love to keep those people in our hospitals, are the great employees who know the processes, they know our procedures. We know that the physicians and the team members that are our pediatric champions, they're prepared for these roles and responsibilities that we need to be able to respond to the disasters and pandemics. We know that it's not possible to keep everybody. And so we have to plan for that turnover. So consider how you would communicate to others about these needs. How will you bring others into this work? What kind of training would other physicians and staff need to support these changes and to support the work? And another thing is, remember those people that are new to this space. Think about the people who might be interested, but they're doing other roles. They're doing other things in your facility. How do you bring them in? How do you get their buy-in and their support and their interest, and bring them in and continue to reach out to them and connect them to this work? And so that you, again, don't have just one person in the role, but you have a team to do this work. And so that if you do have turnover, you've got someone to back it up when it's needed. This fourth bullet point is make the change a norm. So again, a change is just a change until it's adopted as a habit. And if we have to repeat that and keep saying, this is what we did to change, this is what we did to improve, and then eventually it becomes a habit. And so with any change that results in an improvement, it's going to need to be accepted as a norm. So you've got to get the buy-in from the staff. You've got to get the buy-in from the leadership and the support from the leadership. So figuring out how to make that a norm in your facility with your staff, your physicians, is not really something that I can sit here and say, this is how you do it. So a lot of times that's a tricky thing, and it's personal to your facility. And then the last one, tell everybody. If you've achieved something, if you've made a change, tell it, scream it. Say, look what we did. Write it up into a white paper or a manuscript. Present it at conferences. Maybe it's an article for publication. Maybe it's presenting it to leadership or to your board, your advisory board. But let people know that you were a part of DNC and that you made this change. Because the more people you tell, the more people that know, the more people that accept that and say, oh, wow, that's a great idea. I'm so glad to be a part of this. And my facility did this. So just a few ideas to think about sustaining for overall improvement. But then I want to talk to you a little bit about improvement specifically that you might have done in DNC. So we think about you improved through the pediatric preparedness, or you improved your pediatric preparedness through gaining C-suite support. So to sustain those improvements and to continue those improvements, so there's kind of two different things. You've got sustainability, like you've got your changes, you've got your improvements. How do we keep those going? But also, how do we keep improving? So think about how can you continue to have that leadership support? How can you continue, especially with other priorities? How can you continue that getting their buy-in? How can you spread that buy-in to other leadership? So again, leadership is not immune to that turnover. So making sure that other leadership and other people, frontline, the people doing the work, all the way to leadership, get everybody's buy-in, and that's going to keep that sustainability. Incorporate pediatric disaster management into the mission and vision of your organization. So how could you keep that going? Because if it's in the mission and vision, that's that underlying infrastructure to your facility to keep this work going. And then just making it a standard of care throughout the hospital. Again, telling the story. This is what we did. Get people excited about the work and making this a standard of care. And then maybe you improved through roles and responsibilities. Your disaster management committee. Think about continuing to reach out and include those people to this new space. Again, not just the people new to this space, but getting new people in this space. Think about who is not here that might actually have some input and be able to help. I always think about, been a quality improvement specialist for so long. I'm usually called when people have a new process to put in place. I'm like, oh, well, we'll get the QI specialist over here and they can help us walk through this. What if you grabbed the QI specialist early on and think about all the ideas that would come from these people new to this space? Again, plan for staff turnover. Who is going to assume responsibilities, even if it's in the interim, if someone were to leave? If the person leaves, who is going to fill the role? Are they going to have the similar responsibilities? Are they going to have similar training and education to fill those responsibilities? And then thinking about funding, I know throughout the DNC, we've talked about funding and making sure that how do we get that for these roles. And so if you have the funding from grant work or an external source, make sure you have a plan for when that is complete. How do you continue that role even after the grant ends? And then maybe you improved something in your engagement and local regional emergency management. Maybe you linked up with your healthcare coalition. How do you continue that and sustain that? So think about other hospitals and organizations that you can bring into the emergency management coalitions. I know several people asked throughout DNC, what about community hospitals and regional hospitals? Well, if you're a children's hospital and you've connected with your HCC, maybe you have a regional hospital that would also like to be connected and help in that work. Consider a leadership role in your local EM groups. So several of you in the environmental scan said that you do have a leadership role or you're connected. So think about other positions in that and where else can you grow. And continue to be a voice for pediatrics in planning and preparation. Where are those spaces that need to hear the question, what about the kids? Where are they not hearing that? And maybe you could slide in there and say, what about the kids? All right, so just a few things, just a few ideas to keep it going. Later on in the session, we'll probably have some ideas or some time for discussion, and maybe some of you have ideas that you could offer for sustainability. So the big thing is keep the momentum going. where are you going after today, after the end of DNC? Where are we going with this preparedness? So we started with Disaster Networking Collaborative. We've been working on infrastructure, C-suite buy-in. We've been working on roles and responsibilities for pediatric preparedness. And we've been working on engagement in our emergency management landscape. So now maybe we all just jump into the Disaster Response Collaborative and we start to work on our response. We prepare to respond to these emergencies and disasters. And then from there, we start to grow this children's hospital network that's prepared to and ready to respond to emergencies and disasters and pandemics. And we have this great network to share, continue to share ideas, continue to network and have these aha moments and become more aware of what is needed. So hopefully we will see you at the top of this in our overall network. But right now I'm going to turn it over to Christy, and she's going to tell you about her project. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Julie. Boy, that last slide brought lots of things to mind and stuff as I've gone through this journey. So my name's Christy Deutschman. I'm currently the PPN Hub Program Manager at Cardinal Glennon. When the DNC started, I was not the PPN Hub Program Manager. I was an associate manager just working with reunification. So through the journey of the DNC collaborative and stuff, my role has changed and what I'm currently doing. So right now I'm 100% PPN, but I wanted to finish up the DNC with my team at Glennon. So it's been a journey, not only in the DNC, but it's also been a journey for me. And the DNC has helped me through this journey. So go ahead, next slide. So Cardinal Glennon is part of a larger healthcare system. It's part of SSM Health. And we're in 3 states, actually 4 states, Wisconsin, there's 7 hospitals in St. Louis. And in Southern Illinois, there's 9 hospitals and there's 5 hospitals in Oklahoma. Cardinal Glennon is the only pediatric hospital in the SSM healthcare system. You'll figure out why that's important here in just a minute. Next slide. So currently, this is our current building and our helicopter and stuff, but you can read the statistics there, 195 pediatric beds. We're just recently achieved ACS level 1 pediatric trauma center. We're a level 4 NICU, PICU, TCU. We also have a level 3 NICU in one of our community hospitals that's just like 5 miles from Glennon, that our NICU staff and physicians and everything go back and forth. Cardinal Glennon is a educational institution. We're associated with St. Louis University School of Medicine. Next slide, please. So here's just a couple statistics and stuff from last year. And of course, my dog's going to start barking. So you can see our admissions, NICU, outpatient, inpatient, surgeries, ER visits. That's pretty typical. We're at about 40,000 ER visits each year. You can see our patient days for inpatient and NICU there. Next slide, please. So if you look just at the St. Louis region, what we call the St. Louis region and everything else, St. Louis sits right on the Mississippi River. So we have Illinois to the east, and we sit just to the west of the river. I apologize about the dog. And you can see all those little dots and stuff. Those are all of our primary care for pediatricians. We have urgent cares and specialty pediatric offices. Next slide, please. So we're getting ready to build a brand new Cardinal Glennon. There's a couple formal Cardinal Glennon people on this call, so you'll be excited to see that we have a new building that's going to come into play in fall of 2027. Now, what's been interesting, I've also was able to sit on some of the planning committee for this. And because of my association with PPN and the DNC, I got to sit on the part of the planning committee and still continue to sit on it and get to ask all the emergency preparedness questions. So I've been involved in what our incident command is going to look like. I've been involved in how we're storing decon equipment and everything else. So all my disaster preparedness and stuff is coming through fruition as this new building gets to be built. So just awareness, because I know people had put in the chat there, just awareness and everything about emergency preparedness through the DNC. We live it every day. You don't think and you don't realize what you're learning and being exposed to through all of these collaboratives. But when you get asked questions about strange things you should never have been asked a question about, you know the answer, or you ask the question because you're like, well, what are we doing about, how are we deconning people? Where's the decon shelter in the new hospital? So next slide. So emergency preparedness at SSM Health in Cardinal Glennon. So like I said, Cardinal Glennon is the pediatric hospital in a larger system. And we're part of what we call SSM Health St. Louis. So there's 7 other hospitals with Cardinal Glennon, and our emergency preparedness is managed at the region level. So our Oklahoma folks have their own emergency preparedness group. Our Wisconsin folks have their own emergency preparedness group. And in St. Louis, we have our own emergency preparedness group. And it's led by a team of people at what we call corporate. So there is not specifically one person at Cardinal Glennon that has the title of emergency preparedness anything at the hospital specifically, but we do have a director and a couple emergency preparedness specialists at Glennon, or I'm sorry, at the system that work directly with Glennon. So, and we have monthly EP committee meetings and everything. And we do conduct all of our drills and exercises, and we meet for ACS and CMS requirements and everything else. But all of those drills and exercises are led by the region. Next slide, please. So what I learned and what the team learned from the DNC environmental scan. Our strengths, one, we're a PPN hub. We're part of reunification and pre-hospital. Our C-suite engagement, our EP, this group and stuff is led by one of our vice president of operations. The very interesting thing about our C-suite engagement, of the 5 key people in our C-suite, there's only one that was there 3 years ago. So we've had a big turnover in our C-suite. So just to get them onboarded into Glennon and to SSM Health, it's been an adventure. It's been a good adventure, but just to get them then on board with emergency preparedness and everything else, because they brought different backgrounds and different priorities for emergency preparedness. So we're re-engaging our C-suite into emergency preparedness. Like I said, we have an emergency disaster committee that meets monthly, and we partner heavily with all of our EMS agencies throughout the St. Louis region. And we lead the EMSC Pediatric Facility Recognition Program Initiative. So we're heavily involved out in the community. So those were our strengths. What were our opportunities? One, to get participation into our local healthcare coalition and to participate in Missouri and Illinois exercises and drills and FEMA. And just so you know, Illinois and Missouri are both in different FEMA regions. So it's participating in 2 different FEMA regions, 2 different states, et cetera. Opportunity for improvement. We need a dedicated Cardinal Glennon staff member to lead a pediatric emergency preparedness, not just for Cardinal Glennon, but the entire SSM healthcare system. And we need to fill an open FTE position for an EP medical director at Glennon. That position existed and stuff during COVID. Unfortunately, we lost that person they left to go into private practice, and we have not been able to backfill that position. We need to do more drills and exercises that will test our disaster plans. And we need to do those drills and exercises, not just based upon what our system is telling us to do and our region is telling us to do, but we need to identify our strengths and weaknesses as a pediatric hospital. Next slide. Okay, real quick, we're going to go through these next couple slides. the Regional Healthcare Coalition in St. Louis has many layers. Like I said, we're in Missouri and we're in Illinois. We cross FEMA boundaries. There's St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and the multiple counties all around that, both in Missouri and Illinois. So I'm going to try and show you a couple of those layers of why it's not just straightforward of going to one group and saying, hey, I want to be part of you. Next slide. So the Healthcare Coalition is at the bottom of this bigger triangle. So the East-West Gateway Council of Governments, that's the governing body over the entire St. Louis region for both Illinois and Missouri in the St. Louis region. STARS is specifically for St. Louis and St. Louis County. And then embedded below both of those is our Healthcare Coalition. Next slide. So this just gives you a little bit of information on the East-West Gateway. So it includes the greater St. Louis and Missouri and Illinois, shows you the counties there. And it's governed by an independent board of governors. Next slide. And my dog's going to lose her life here, even though I love her dearly. So then within Region C, which is within the Missouri Healthcare Coalitions, there's 3 across the state of Missouri. One that's Kansas City, one that's we call non-urban, and then we call Region C, which is St. Louis. And it operates under the STARS. And that's where the funding and everything ties in with ASPR. Next slide. So there's just a better graphic. So we're in Missouri Region C for the Urban Healthcare Coalition. And then under all of that is our healthcare subcommittee for our healthcare coalition. Next slide. So lots of layers there. One particular thing that I've learned to do, don't wait. If you're not involved in your local healthcare coalition, don't wait to be invited. Find somebody who's currently on those healthcare coalitions and get yourself invited, or get a representative from your hospital invited. I just happened to attend a meeting because I rode along with my region person and said, I really want to get involved in the healthcare coalition. So since then, I've been actively engaged in the healthcare coalition in St. Louis, and actually helping be the pediatric lens and stuff on some region drills that we're getting ready to do this summer. So don't wait to get invited, put your foot in the door and keep walking. Don't let them kick you out. Somebody needs to be the voice of pediatrics. So that's my recommendation on getting involved in your healthcare coalition. What else? I kind of already talked about what our opportunities are for. We've already started the process with HR, because we know HR processes take forever, to create a specific pediatric emergency preparedness specialist that will reside at Cardinal Glennon, but will work closely with our region emergency preparedness support. We need to get that FTE filled for our medical director. And like I said, we need to do more drills and exercises specifically for MCI, our surge, and I'm, sit on the reunification domain. And I've looked at our reunification plan. It's not great. We need to drill on reunification and do a better job. So we're working on all of those things. Next slide. Or was that my last one? That was my last one. So when we first got into being involved in PPN Cardinal Glennon, when we first were awarded the grant, we weren't chosen as because of our strength in emergency preparedness. We were chosen because of our strength in what we do in our pre-hospital programs. So we are literally using PPN resources and DNC and DRC and everything else to boost our disaster preparedness planning. So that's been the greatest opportunity for us, and to network and collaborate. And just so most of you don't know, we're not the only children's hospital in St. Louis. St. Louis isn't all that big compared to some of the bigger cities in Boston and San Francisco. We have St. Louis Children's. So we've connected with St. Louis Children's and working with, because if we have a major disaster, God forbid we have a school shooting or anything else in St. Louis, when we talk about reunification plans and everything else, the two children's hospitals are going to have to work together, because they're going to go to both, and we've got to figure out how to help identify. So That's probably going to be one of our DRC projects because St. Louis Children's is also going to be in DRC, and we're going to have to figure out how we're going to do reunification as being 2 pediatric hospitals in one city. So thank you all. I'll put my contact information in the chat if anybody wants to get a hold of me. And I'm just going to say a quick hi, shout out to those former Glennon folks that are on this call. And I'm supposed to introduce Lindsay. So Lindsay, I'm turning this over to you.
Thanks. So my name is Lindsay Rouse, and I am one of the regional emergency managers for the Providence Health and Services system. I'll go ahead and go to the next slide so I can explain that more. So Providence, if we are one of the larger healthcare systems in the country, I think I last heard we might be 3rd in the country. We span over 8 states, mostly on the western side of the United States. And then we have 51 hospitals in those 8 states. My role particularly is part of, I am one of 2 emergency managers for the state of Oregon. So my purview is I look over all of the emergency management programs for the 8 hospitals that reside in Oregon. We also have 86 clinics within that purview as well. So we validate all of the emergency management and emergency preparedness plans for the clinics and the hospitals. And it's kind of nuanced between safety and some other things, but within the Joint Commission's framework, we oversee all, the 86 satellites, not just clinics, but the satellites. The clinics are a whole other, I think there's 130 some odd clinics on top of the satellites. So it's very, very large and very convoluted very quickly. Within that, in the Portland, what we call Portland service area, that little circle in the middle of the map, there are 4 hospitals that are fairly close to each other. None of our hospitals are pediatric specific hospitals, but we do have a couple programs within our hospitals that support pediatrics, which is why we had such a large group of our caregivers supporting the DNC project. So I was reached out to by what we call our Children's Operations Council lead. Her name was Len, and she said, hey, this thing's happening within this, this large collaboratives going on, and we've really never touched base with emergency management. So she started this whole thing with us right before DNC started and said, would you like to join this? Would you like to support us in branching emergency management and everything that we do in our departments with what's happening in the children's world of Providence? And I said, absolutely, I would love to do that. So I got involved from her, and she reached out with me. So that's how I came to the space. So within this, our hospitals are not going to go into as much depth as Christy did, but we have some of that same like urban area. It's the UAC system. We're under 4 different regions, or OHA region 1, 2, 5, and 6 within Oregon, just because we span so large. Within region 1, which is that group of Seaside plus the 4 hospitals in the Portland area, that's all region 1. We actually have Dornbecker Children's Hospital in our area. We have, a couple other children's trauma hospitals in our area. So we rely heavily on them for a lot of the children's work. But we do have within that section, we do have Providence St. Vincent's, which is one of the largest hospitals in the state, and it's our largest hospital within Providence, Oregon. It's a 480-bed hospital. 84 of those beds are dedicated to our children's specialties. And as you can see, we have about 123 beds throughout the Portland area. Some very specific ones, like our Willamette Falls facility, which is a very, very small, not quite community hospital, but it's a very small hospital. And it has 20 adolescent psych beds. So we have a very specific CAPU unit. So a couple nuances like that. We are St. Vincent's ED beds, even though it's 13 beds, we see about 45 patients in a day, which comes out to about 16,500 patients a year. So it does stay busy, even though it's a stone's throw from a pediatric hospital. So it's nice. Something that we get to kind of be involved in is both my Providence Portland facility and my Providence St. Vincent's facilities are undergoing remodeling in their ED. And so we get to do some of the same work that Christy was referring to and bringing some of those things together and making sure that they have, you know, how do we upgrade our decon plan? How do we upgrade some of our pediatric response plans and our pediatric surges and our supplies and things like that? So that's something really cool that we get to do with this team. One thing that's not mentioned on this is under Providence Portland, we do have a 20-bed Center for Medically Fragile Children. It is not under our purview, so it's not listed on here, but it is something that uses some of the tools that we give them. They're not under Joint Commission, but it's very, very specialty inpatient for patients that need full-time monitoring for medically fragile children. So really, really unique situation with those guys, and they're a really cool team. They love what they do, but we don't get to work with them in depth as much, so they're not on the list, but that's about another 20 beds added to this. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So prior to me coming on board, we have part of Joint Commission is we always have to have our emergency management committees. And we've done this at every hospital. We cadence them about every other month. It's always historically been, you know, our executive suite, either some version of CO, CE, CN, CM. Someone has sat in that room, if not 2-3 people at a time. We've trained up those leaders. They've gone to Anniston. If you've never done Anniston, Alabama, and done the HCL course, I urge you, I want to put a plug in for Anniston, go to Anniston, Alabama, and do the healthcare leadership course if you want to practice mass cash. That's what I'm going to say. Let's stop there. With that, though, we have a really bolsterous set of different department leaders that come in from security. So like our different leaders that are not clinical support all the things that we do. So facilities is a huge part of what we do in emergency management, bringing those leaders in to make sure that we have not just the plans that we create in a silo, but how do we implement such plans, and working with our security leaders to making sure that we have a bolsterous plan for when we have to execute X, Y, and Z plan. And then we also we do have our clinical directors on these calls. Depending on the size of the ministry, we call them ministries. Depending on the size of the ministry, we can have either directors or their unit leaders in this hospital EMC. And this has been a long-standing tradition for us. In that we do exercises, we do tabletop exercises, we do decon training, we do evacuation training. All of these things we've done for years. But one of the things that really narrowed down and getting brought into this collaborative was to understand that the teaching that we were doing at this executive higher level training was not getting down to the frontline staff. And it's one of the biggest things and biggest gaps that we've seen over the last few years, starting pre-pandemic, actually. So this really brought that to light. And so you can see the little arrow and what we've done in more recent months. So as we started breaking out emergency management committee. Yes, we're keeping the hospital leadership one, which is so invaluable. However, we're creating two of them that are more specific. And one of them is our clinical EMC, and it allows for all, not just their clinical directors, but for the unit level managers, obviously the executive suite, but anyone that feels that they can come back with information how to support their teams. This is hospital-wide, and again, we're not a pediatric hospital, so this is med-surg, this is surgical services, this is et cetera, and how we can support those teams from an emergency management perspective. But something really unique came out of this group. And we have our children's council team came to us and said, it's all of our directors for each of those hospitals, it's all of our nursing leaders for each of those hospitals, their A&Ms, and then their charge nurses, and a couple of their safety coordinators for their units. So they got to sit on this call with me, and it happened to be after every one of our meetings with the DNC, and they would come and say, okay, Lindsay, debrief with us on what we do within our hospitals to correlate what they're talking about here in DNC with what we're doing in hospitals. So I was actually able to sit down with them and say, yeah, this is what we do. This is the plans we have. Let's go over it. Let's deep dive and make sure you guys feel comfortable with the plans that we've created within Providence. And so that segued into really them kind of deep diving and allowing them to ask the deeper questions and say, hey, this doesn't really work for our teams. Can we create something different? we like something more, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a great segue for them to really get engaged. And I'm so thankful for this collaborative to do that, because man, they wanted to see these things. And then as soon as some bad things happened over winter, we had a huge ice storm over in February. They were like, all of a sudden, it was like, wait, how are we implementing some of these things? You know, we talk about it and then wait, we haven't implemented it yet. And so we're really working through some of that processes with them and what that looks like. And so we took that call, and I was actually said, hey, this is a great framework. And we started doing it for what is now our emergency department disaster committee and our surgical services disaster committee and things like that. So we're going beyond some of the local things and the local stuff and saying, hey, what are we doing at a regional level for all of our hospitals, all 8 hospitals in the Oregon region, to make sure everyone is up to speed with this. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll kind of show you guys what I've been training on. So this is the emergency response guide. It is specific to acute ministry departments. I will say that this is built off of Providence's policies. So obviously, if you review this, you're going to say, that's not what we do. That's not the code colors we use, but we still use code colors. We don't use plain language codes. So that's a whole other conversation. But this is something that we wanted to give to them to help them understand a little bit of how the framework switches when we go into a response. So we took our big emergency operations 200-page emergency operations plan that we've written and really boiled some of these things down to kind of the simple language of, you know, what they need to know, bullet pointed down to what they need to know, how to get a hold of us, things like that, for their departments. So imagine this entire document is printed on a shelf in their department for grab and go, pull it open. What are we supposed to be doing right now? Ease, and they're not having to sit there and search for this information. You can quickly see through the table of contents. So we go through kind of how to communicate with us, what that command and control switch is what a lot of what we talk about for emergency management. You know, what is the HICS language? What does that org chart look like? Things like that. And then it goes further down into the actual codes and what they need to do in the codes. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Go to the next slide. One more, sorry. So business continuity has been a really big part of our language lately. It's not the funnest conversation, but we did throw a slide in there for these guys just to show if they had to up and evacuate their department. For a great instance, we had a full power outage at one of our hospitals, and our NICU did not have med gas. So they had to move their babies to a different unit that did have med gas and how that would look. And so they not only had to respond to the med gas issue, but they had to transfer their department to a different area so they could have active med gas and work on their NICU babies. So we created an outline for them for if they had to up and move their department, what that would look like. And so what they would need, what kind of skills required to staff that department, et cetera. This is becoming a Joint Commission requirement, just FYI, to have some form of language for your business continuity above and beyond some of your network downtimes and things like that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I gave you 3 examples of some of the codes that we use. We pulled this straight from our policy information. So we work with security, we work with facilities on what's being done. I use some of our higher level ones that we have to deal with. Active shooter, external triage, which is, or earthquake, which is an external triage code. It's one of my favorite questions being in the Pacific Northwest is, do we have an earthquake plan? Yes, we have an earthquake plan. And then the last one, it just kind of has like an overview of what our utility failure conversation is. When we started to go through this with our teams and with the disaster network team and the NICU, was right around the time last year that Legacy up here in Portland had a death. They had an active shooter in their hospital, and they had a shooting and one of their officers was killed. And so this conversation plus the unfortunate death of Dr. Smallwood in a neighboring hospital, a stone's throw away from us, really led us to deep diving and doing some exercise and some drills with those more vulnerable units, namely the mother baby units. I don't know how many of you guys, because you're children's hospitals, how much of you have like the mother baby stuff. but that is a highly vulnerable area just because of domestic violence and domestic dispute, et cetera, et cetera. So we really worked with them on doing some tabletop exercises and, you know, bringing in security and what that looks like for them. Another part of that we did called walkthrough talkthroughs. And we had security go to every single department in the hospital. And for the state of Oregon, for us, that's over 500 plus departments. And so we had security go through every department and walk through, you know, how to break line of sight, how to get behind a locked door, things like that, that they needed to know in their unit if it were to happen to see an active shooter or hear an active shooter called overhead. So just in the last 5 months, active shooter conversations have been really paramount in our hospital systems. And it is guaranteed one of the things Joint Commission asks us about every single time, especially in the last 2 years. They have really brought up and hammered down, what is your active shooter plan? How are you drilling it? How are you practicing it with your nurses? And ever since we've done this step with them, they have been, it's actually been great. The environment of care guys are like, oh, okay, that's fine. But the nurses in the Joint Commission session are like, oh, that's amazing. Tell me more. How are you doing this? This is so cool. Can we have access to this? And just knowing that we're trying to support the nurses in that way has been just absolutely life-changing for them to kind of hear those concerns over the last few years and to know that we're hunkered down a little bit better. I'll go to the next slide, and I want to, the utility failure page I have on there as the original document. The NICU team came back to me and said, hey, this is not going to work for us. We want something better. We want something more in depth. And I was like, great, let me build something for you. And I'll show you here in a minute what it looks like. But I wanted you to see the original one on this sheet. When we presented this document, we presented it in a monthly, how do we train this format? And so you can see we set up a recommended training schedule. And this really goes over some of our high level, what we kind of have to deal with most often. Once in a while, we throw in something that's a little more unique, like evacuation or active shooter. But ultimately, these are the things that we really have to kind of train on anyway. So utility failure, power outage up here for some reason is kind of a constant. We always have to deal with power outages in one way or the other. Sometimes they lead into a generator failure. So we're practicing some of those what we call the impacts. So whether you are dealing with an earthquake or whether you're dealing with a hurricane or you're dealing with a tornado or just a bad weather storm, you know, the chances of having power outage are really high. So we train less on the actual thing itself. We train less on what to do in an earthquake, but we train on what the impacts are of that earthquake. We train more on low staffing. We train more on, you know, how to evacuate from a flood and changing locations and things like that would occur in those things. So we focus more on the impacts of the event than the event itself, because people kind of tune down. Well, they're not that often. We don't really have to deal with earthquakes that often, but hey, we have power outages probably 4 times a year for whatever reason that they come. So we practice those types of things and then sneak in once in a while, we sneak in the heavier things like a mass casualty, what that would look like, so that they kind of get that language into their speech as well. With that, we actually gave them a drill card or a tabletop exercise, depending on which side of the clinical side you come from, on what to do, how to exercise it, and allowing the managers of that department to train the frontline staff. Hey, this is what we would do in our department. So a NICU is going to respond to an evacuation drastically different than an ED, which is drastically different than the OR. And so we train to teach, or we teach them how to train to their department. Because we can't, I mean, as a department of 2 people cannot train every single department in all of the state of Oregon. So we really wanted that to come from them and what they would do and the specifics on that. I'll go to the next slide. Sorry if I'm talking fast, my Texan's coming out. What we do every month is when we remind the caregivers, like, hey, this month is coming up. So it's the beginning of June. I think this month was bomb threat off the top of my head. I could have scrolled back and told you, but so we said, hey, this is what the active thing is this month. Make sure you're talking about it. Here's a flyer to post in your departments, and it allows them to talk about it with a visual aid and a high overview of what we're training on that month. And it allows them in every department to have the same conversations. And it's great because it does elicit those questions from those department leaders or the department leaders within themselves to say, hey, I'm an ED manager. What's this other ED doing over here? And how can we kind of standardize those across ministries versus trying to do it in a, kind of a myopic approach. So that was the process. I'll have you go to the next slide. And this is what my NICU team came up with. And they said, hey, we love the idea of having this power outage thing. And I apologize, this is a little bit blurry, but I was able to take some of that detail, that more high level information, and ended up giving them a checklist and said, okay, in preparation for annual, power outages for us usually start in October and last through spring. So I'm like, okay, in preparation of October, here's your checklist. Do you know where your go bag is? Do you know what's in your go bag? Do you know how to get it? Do you have batteries, and check your batteries in your go bag? So all of those things are in that checklist with an expected battery life section. Because when we had our incident in February, we ended up we were out of power for, I want to say 14, 16 hours, and things like CT battery only lasts 8 hours. So your backup battery for your CT scanner can only be 8 hours and things like that. Your WOW stations only have so much battery power. So knowing that type of equipment and knowing where your backup batteries are in that unit, I guarantee you, if you're like, hey, if you have 20 units, 30 units calling facilities to say, I need extension cords, I need a backup battery, I'm running out of this, they are already running around like chickens with their heads cut off to be calling for additional things that you can already have on your unit is changing. It's just like absolutely changing for them. So we went through that and kind of created it. And then you can see, like, I did like a blank space for them to write in what their department needs to do. So I wrote their little NICU suggestion of considering congregating neonates into isolates to maintain their temp. So when our temperatures got down into the 50s in the hospital over winter, they were putting all the babies in the same isolates to keep them all warm. So those are just like little suggestions of things like that to do when we had those scenarios. So they came up with this and said, we want this type of thing. We want a checklist. We want to go through this. So I'm working on each of those codes and creating a checklist for them for the future. So this has not been implemented yet, but these are the types of changes that this group, the DNC group, has led them to think through, has led them to go into that process. So it's been really neat to kind of watch them walk that process with me. Next slide, and I think it's the end, but moving forward, we are supposed to have a mass casualty exercise coming up. I created a family reunification plan last summer with everything else going on, and I urge you to not Google Providence this week because we are all over the national news. But with everything going on right now, we were hoping to do a family reunification test and do a mass casualty with a family reunification test this year. Don't think it's going to happen, considering 6 of my hospitals decided to strike this week. But we are hoping to get that in and kind of get that tested. Other than that, I mean, these teams are doing amazing jobs. Unfortunately, the person that brought me in is no longer there, but the teams behind it that's been working on this, I said, hey, now that she's gone, are you okay? Like, do you want me to bow out? Do you feel like you're moving on your own? And they're like, yeah, we're moving on our own, but don't leave us. Like, this is great. You're answering questions, you're keeping us involved. And so I'm so thankful for this group, the DNC, to kind of get them into that mindset of what they need to do and allowing us to get into their department and actually work with them on how they want to respond. So this has been really, really enlightening for them.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Christy. Okay, it's time for everybody to get their phones back out, or again, just type in slido.com into your browser and then type in 3132447. We want to know, identify the most significant area of improvement within your DNC work. So did you get the most out of engagement, out of personal learning and growth, C-suite support, positions and roles, or other? Looks like engagement is staying above that 50% mark, but personal learning and growth is trying to creep up. Oh. I wish I was a better sports announcer. I feel like that would be fun here. Engagement is in the lead, 50%. Here comes personal learning and growth. Fantastic. It looks like engagement, a lot of you feel like engagement, which is wonderful. We did have a lot of wonderful conversations, but I'm glad to know that there's been a lot of personal learning and growth as well. And of course, C-suite support positions and roles. Those have also hopefully been valuable assets to you. So we're going to turn off I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to turn off the slides and we're going to open it up to any questions that anyone has about disaster response collaborative that's coming soon, or disaster networking collaborative, anything, any resources or anything, any questions that you might have.
Other than questions, you can also raise comments or things that you'd like to share from what you learned today. Well, I could call on people. Johnny, what would you like to say?
I thought all the speakers were super interesting. Specifically, I would love to see the templates that the Providence Hospital is using for their education, for those, were they monthly education rollouts, and sort of the guidance behind that, sort of how are you doing it? I tried to do something like that during my fellowship, and I would say it was moderately received. And it was purely we did emergency medicine huddles every morning and evening. So I would try and roll out a mini lecture. And I felt like I was just kind of getting in people's ways talking about disaster stuff. So I wonder if there's a better zone to do that, timing wise, especially.
So in the template, and I'm happy to share, I can kind of share I'll share a mid version. I don't have a final new draft, but I'll share the changes that I've made since last time. But in the calendar, I put like a little, 5 to 10 minutes in parentheses, and it'll say like in your monthly meetings, because everyone has a monthly safety meeting in their department for us. So in your monthly meetings, take 5 minutes out of your agenda, and this is what you can discuss, or 10 minutes. And so I kind of give a kind of an estimate on what I think they're going to take, knowing full well that some aren't, like if it's a code orange, some departments aren't going to talk about it at all, and some departments are going to talk about it a lot, versus flip-flop. If it's mass casualty, the ED is going to be talking about it a lot, right? But other departments might be like, okay, this is what's happening. If you hear MCI overhead, this is what it means. So I put a little parentheses of how I did it. And then we gave them a monthly, we gave them a walkthrough for the managers of like, this is what to do. This is the resources to have out, ready to go. So we wanted to give them a curriculum. So we weren't putting too much burden on the managers to figure out what to teach and how to teach it and what to talk about. That's what we were really trying to do with that. But I will completely agree with you that rollout was pulling teeth for the longest time. So when this collaborative came in and started like, oh, we have new avenues to teach, it kind of changed that perspective. I have full departments that still have no idea what this is, and it's been rolled out for 2 years now. So I'm not going to say this is perfect, but we have had much more, what's the word? Like just much more engagement in the last year than I had for the entire year and a half prior. So we're catching new ways and catching new ground, but I can definitely share all of it with you.
And just to tie that in, I think part of the DNC and certainly part of the DRC is to provide those templates so that the initial sort of overcoming the engagement part and trying to create your own stuff, which is so time consuming and so difficult, at least we have something like a flyer or a one pager to hand out to the different departments or to the different emergency managers and disaster leaders. And I use them in my hospital. I think they're a great resource, and the PPN has all these resources that are of similar, very, very reviewed, well worded, and not too long, which I think is probably the most important part for everyone. So there'll be links to all this stuff, and we'll send out your templates once we get permission to do so. I think they would be a great addition to all the other stuff we've sent out this year.
Johnny, I wanted to give Kate, if she's able to, some time to talk a little bit about the DRC and what's coming up. Kate, are you able to come off mute?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Laura. And thanks everyone for all your tremendous work over the course of this collaborative. We are really excited about this next stage of the Disaster Response Collaborative, really moving from the infrastructure of, C-suite support and standardized roles, and really kind of a strategic plan for how we improve our disaster response, to now actually putting it into action. And the Disaster Response Collaborative is really intended to focus on looking at how we're currently doing these processes, how we're currently implementing our disaster response, and identifying ways to improve over time. And I think this is really just the next phase. Nobody's really done this across, the nation at this scale. No one's really looked at our processes more deeply, certainly not within children's hospitals. And I think this is really another opportunity for a shared network of learning, where we can really grow best practices together and hopefully drive a more coordinated and robust pediatric disaster response for the nation. So really hope that many of you will register if you haven't. The expectations are always what you want them to be. Our goal is really just to provide support, to provide the recipes, the tools, the coaching, the subject matter experts, of course, always for free. This is all federally funded, and we really just want to help each other to do better on behalf of children. So thanks, Laura, for giving me an opportunity to speak to it.
Thanks, Kate. Julie, do you want to go ahead and pull up the last few slides? Thanks to everybody for hanging with us to the bitter end here. Julie?
Hi, everybody. I mentioned the PPN podcast, and this is the part 2 to the one that I had mentioned where Dr. Phyllis Hendry had spoken about Golisano's Children's Hospital. And then part 2, Nikki Shimko from the same hospital will talk a little bit more about that. So you can access that in where you get your podcasts, or you can go to pedspandemicnetwork.org, and it has it right there in the top table, ready, prep, go. But great, the whole list is on the website. Highly recommend these podcasts. They are really fantastic.
So this is the main slide about the DRC and the topic areas. As mentioned before, I'm pretty sure that most of you have heard us talk about this. There's a whole website under the PPN website under Get Involved. And please go there and please do register your hospital. You'll notice a new list of children's hospitals that have registered. So we'd like your name to be on that list as well. And we'd like you to continue on with this journey with us. Thanks, Hannah. Julie, you can go to the next slide. This is for the nurses that want their contact hours. If there are physicians that have not yet requested an attestation form for MOC credit and feel you've met the requirements, please email us. And FYI, there is no session evaluation, but please do look for that email from the DNC PPN at austin.utexas.edu email address. Yes, you email us, Laura, Julie, Hannah, or that. Hannah, can you put the email address in the chat too? There it is. Thank you. Just let us know and we'll get back to you. Watch for that collaborative evaluation. It's really important. We'd like you to all finish it by the end of the month. It's 10 questions. They are short. You can finish it in less than 10 minutes. And this is the last slide. So, Kate, did you want to say any final words?
I just thank you so much. I mean, I know all of you put in so much effort. We appreciate your time. At minimum, we hope you made some great connections and partnerships. I know many of you made significant progress in terms of disaster planning, and we really hope again that you feel proud of the work that you've done. So thank you so much.
Thank you all. And just a reminder to close your browsers when you're done with the nursing evaluation so that those who are remaining can just have a brief debrief with the faculty. We very much appreciate your time.